to. I got two things to start with. One is somebody said, where do you get red lights? And there's a guy called the LEDman.com who sells the most affordable arrays of LEDs. So they have one that's like, the size of your palm that's got a whole array, and you can either get single frequency where they're all red or they're all infrared, or you can get mixed frequency, and the one that I like the best is red and infrared combo. And the red is like 880 or 660, and the infrared is like 880, and that just seems to be a good general combination.
Where do you find the information how to use that effectively?
You mean information about red light?
Yeah, red
Oh,
light
just
and
type it
infrared
in.
and all that.
Just type it into a search engine.
Okay, all right.
Red light, you can call it phototherapy. The problem that you have with doing anything on the internet is that about 90% of the information is less than good.
Yeah, but you need to check it out different sources.
That's right. So you can go to the primary literature, in which case you're dealing with obfuscation as an art form. Scientists write papers that only other scientists can understand. And if they write papers that other people can understand, they get demerit points for doing that. So the ideal article, the ideal publication that you write is one where nobody understands it but one other person in the world, and everybody else is afraid to admit that they don't understand it.
Where do you go for information?
I read the primary literature, and I also read controversy. So if you want to know what's happening in politics, you read the extreme left and the extreme right, and the extreme this and the extreme that, and each one of them is giving you, like the blind men on the elephant, they're giving you a different picture of things, and that facts are somewhere in between all these different things, and people who tell you that this can't happen and that can't happen, 99% of the time they're wrong. Scientists that predict that something can't happen are 99% wrong, at least in terms of historical predictions. There are all scientists who say that things can't happen. It haven't been proven wrong yet, but it's just a matter of time. Okay, so that's where I get my LED devices, and they're like, I think, 10 or $20 less than what you would normally get on Amazon. The next question that somebody asked me about was Piracetam, when I said, I use Piracetam to reset my circadian rhythm, and that's an undocumented effect. So it happens to me, it happens with me every time I do it, but there's no literature on this subject at all. In other words, it's something that works for me and for a few other people, but it's never been studied. But I do it anyway. So there's.
How did you get to it?
Well, I was using Piracetam.
But how did you find out first? Since there are no studies on it.
I was using Piracetam. And when I did my Piracetam a particular way, it changed my circadian rhythm. And I said, that was weird. And so I did it again, and it changed my rhythm. And then I did it again, and it changed my rhythm. And I've done it 100 times, and every time it's done the same thing.
But my question is, how did you get to it in the first place?
What were you
I tried it. I used Piracetam. So what I did was I consumed my entire day's supply of Piracetam in the morning. That's what I did, different. So, I made up my day's supply of Piracetam. Normally I would set it down next to my computer, and I would drink it throughout the day. So it was spreading it out, right?
He's trying to figure out what you were taking the
In other
Piracetam.
words, what made you want to go?
Oh,
What
so,
made you go?
well, that's a different kind of story. I mean, it's different than finding out an effect that's unique to you. But I take Piracetam because it helps me overcome what I call testosterone poisoning. Okay? Men have a testosterone influence at a particular place in their life, and women who have the sensitivity will develop male characteristics as well in terms of personality and all that. But one of those characteristics is brain development for the bundle of fibers that connect your left and right side of your brain together, goes through the center like a tree, that spreads out, that bundle is smaller in men. And so that does several things. It kind of separates the left and right sides of the brain from each other so that they develop asynchronous kinds of processing skills, which is useful for spatial memory. And that's not necessarily the reason why men never get lost. Yeah.
And then
But-
one of those, they ask
But it
for
does
direction.
interfere with verbal abilities, because verbal abilities require synchronous processing in the both halves of the brain that need to come together in a line. And women have a much more robust corpus callosum that connects the left and right side of the brain, and they have stronger verbal skills. And so, because I have classic male poisoning, testosterone poisoning, my verbal skills are deficient. They're not as good as my spatial skills.
How
When
do
I
you
have
know
my
that?
IQ measured, it's 20-point difference between my verbal IQ and my spatial IQ.
How do you know if you have a testosterone poison?
Because
What are the signs?
I have a certain external body part.
No, I mean, how would a person know if you're having a poison? I mean, we all.
No, that's a
testosterone.
joke. That's a joke. Testosterone poisoning is something that all men suffer from, and it's a joke that women appreciate.
Guess what does he do for you?
So you were gonna
All men are testosterone poisoned, in other words.
you
So,
were gonna clarify the body temperature, the pulse.
You took it, you took the Piracetam in the morning, then the
so I
afternoon.
took my entire dose of Piracetam in the morning, and that night I went to sleep early, and the next morning I woke up at dawn. And that's unusual for me, being a night owl.
How long did
So-
it last?
That day, and
Just
but
that-
it would tend to last for several days,
Oh.
and then I'd start to drift again, and I take another dose of
Did your body
Piracetam.
temperature correlate with that?
I wasn't measuring my body temperature at the time, so I don't know. Now, that's the advantage of being fully wired, is that you'd have all that data, and you could do cross correlations of everything to figure it all out as to how the Piracetam might be working. But now what I do is I'll take a level tablespoon of Piracetam, put it in the thing, and drink it within 2 hours. And that night I go to sleep early. The next morning I wake up at dawn. As soon as the light starts to come up, I wake up. It doesn't matter if I've been sleeping 6 hours or 8 hours. It doesn't matter. I just wake up spontaneously, and it's worked that way every single time I've done it.
How
And
much
it's
do you take?
a tablespoon,
What is that?
10 grams,
10 grams. All right.
maybe. Yeah, about 10 grams.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it addictive?
In the sense that I don't want to give it up, yes. But I use it intermittently, and I don't notice it when I don't take it. I don't notice anything, so I can't say that it's got any physiological addiction mechanism. But I think a lot of it would just depend on what your issue was. So, for example, this is a perfect thing to use if you have distress when you're flying in an airplane. So when you get in an airplane, it goes up to 35,000 feet, and the cabin is pressurized to 7,000 feet. That's like, spending a weekend in Lake Tahoe. And if you have any kind of altitude maladaptation or altitude sickness, it's likely to be triggered by going from sea level to 7,000 feet. And your body isn't used to it and doesn't adjust properly, and your brain has a lack of oxygen, and you feel bad. And taking Piracetam fixes that. It's so good that one of my clients had a mother who had tuberculosis and lost a lung and had scar tissue in the other lung, who actually had some degree of distress at sea level. But she maintained it with a little bit of oxygen and just being careful not to overexert herself. And every time the family went on vacation, she'd be in distress. They had a home up in Tahoe. So I told him about this and said, try it on her and just see if this works. So she started Piracetam. They went up. She spent the whole week at Lake Tahoe with no distress whatsoever. I had another friend who hiked Mount Whitney and got up to 13,000 feet or something like that. He took Piracetam and made it.
Do you know how it works in the body?
It has an obvious oxygen sparing effect on the brain, but all the exact mechanisms, I think, still are not elucidated. So, for example, they had pilots, and they would put them in simulators and pump the oxygen out of the simulator. So if they would take the oxygen out to, let's say, 17,000 feet, which is like 55% of the normal oxygen or something like that, seasoned pilots would crash their plane in about 90 seconds to maybe 2.5 minutes. They would lose enough and be out of it that they couldn't handle it and crash the plane. And given 2.5 grams of Piracetam, which is just one dose, they were able to fly for 30 minutes without crashing the plane.
Wow.
So that's the kind of direct effect it has.
So it's directly related to lack of oxygen for the brain.
beneficial effect is directly related
Yeah.
to counteracting a lack of oxygen.
Gotcha, yeah.
So what kinds of effects could that be? Well, there's all kinds of stuff that might happen. It might even be bad. If you have apnea, for example, you might experience a deeper, longer phase of not breathing before you finally, the lack of oxygen wakes you up. So it's not necessarily all good, but altitude sickness
Unless
and,
you're using sleep apnea machine, then it automatically forces you to breathe.
that's right. And that's regular whether you need it or
Yeah.
not, yes.
What about,
Does it help with jet lag?
No, not that I know of, but the resetting effect might be useful for jet lag, but because I travel so little, I don't have any personal experience with that. And most of the people that I know that work with jet lag will use adrenergic agents and serotonergic agents and stuff like that to push their jet lag around, and melatonin and things like that, and get better results. But I wouldn't be surprised if it helped. But so if you do a lot of traveling, you know, share your observations with me.
So how does it work?
Any comments on aniracetam or phenylpiracetam?
I have tried, I think 4 or 5 of the racetams, and I don't like any of them as well as piracetam. And you know, I'll swear that on a Bible, and then I go online and I'll read somebody else who says oxiracetam is the best, and they'll swear that on a Bible. So that's one thing that I've learned, that every racetam seems to have its supporters, and so you know, I don't know any way to resolve that other than you just have to try a bunch of them and find out which one works for you.
Is there much literature on this subject?
Not on hypoxia, yes. Anoxia and hypoxia, yeah, there's quite a bit on that. But on this circadian rhythm reset thing, no, there's nothing on that.
On this drug that you use for sleeping.
I don't use piracetam for sleeping, I use it for
Is
my
there literature
circadian
on
rhythm. Huh?
Is there literature on it, studies on it?
Piracetam?
Yeah.
Maybe, what, 1,000, 2,000?
Yeah, but not
Something
for
like that.
circadian
Is this,
No.
is this regularly available?
It's a 50-year-old drug.
But is it available without prescription?
Yeah. I buy it through Amazon and eBay, and you can also get it from European pharmacies like Interlab as a pharmaceutical, where it's packaged as a pharmaceutical. It's not approved in the USA, but it is available through compounding pharmacies under, you know, the fact that, you know, the FDA only deals with interstate commerce, and compounding pharmacies are state groups, so you can get it through that. But when I got my prescription for piracetam, a kilo of piracetam cost me $350, and now I can buy it for $80
From where?
over the counter.
I mean, where?
eBay,
eBay?
Amazon.
Amazon?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what-
And I use the powdered form,
Yeah.
which is the cheapest. If you put it in capsules, it's much more expensive because the encapsulation process, when you're putting something cheap into capsules, it proportionately increases the amount
Then you add
dramatically.
something else to dissolve it in.
No, it dissolves very fine in water. It just has a bitter taste. Now, when I first dissolved it in water and tasted it, I said, oh God, this is terrible. And I didn't think I'd get used to it. But in fact, within a few days, I was used to it. And I noticed that in terms of addiction, when I was in a situation where I could use piracetam, I actually developed a kind of subconscious bitter craving, like a sugar craving, but for bitter flavor. And so that bitter taste grew on me with time, which is one of the reasons I trust piracetam.
How long have you been using it off and on?
15 years?
15, okay, so you got a lot of experience behind it.
Yeah, I've consumed, I don't know, what, 4 or 5 kilos? Something like that. And
You're fine, so it must be working.
yeah, it's one of those, let me give you an example of you know, one of the, so in the United States, if you're a pediatrician and you run across an infant who's having myoclonic seizure disorders and you treat it with piracetam, you lose your license. If you're in England and you run across, you're a pediatrician and you run across a newborn infant that's got myoclonic seizures and you fail to use piracetam, you lose your license. So, and the dose that I would take, you know, a normal person would take would be roughly 250 to 300 milligrams a day. And the treatment for myoclonic seizure disorder in a newborn infant is 1,200 to 2,400 grams a day. So my 10-gram dose, my tablespoon dose of 10 grams, is half to a third of what a newborn infant gets, I weigh 200 pounds, a newborn infant weighs 8 pounds. Just think of how much piracetam that is. to a
You
newborn
said
infant.
200 grams?
No, 12
Oh,
100.
oh.
milligrams.
Milligrams. Oh.
12 grams.
Oh.
Yeah, so that would be a heaping tablespoon, or a rounded tablespoon, to 2 for a newborn infant. So that gives you an idea of its fundamental safety, that the only way you can kill an animal with piracetam is to drop 50 pounds on it and break its back.
So I've heard 2 uses for people traveling by air and for sleeping, good sleep.
And vacationing in high altitude situations.
Yeah, are there any other uses?
If you have asthma, it could be useful for you, or if you have emphysema, some kind of pulmonary, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Does it help you with the lung pressure?
Well, it's a good question. And, I haven't, there's one thing that happens when you have low air pressure. People become more alkaline. And so if you have bursitis in your shoulder from an injury, it's likely to flare up when the weather turns bad. The air pressure goes down, you get pain. If you have alkaline pain in general,
The lung pressure, your lungs.
yeah. So that's what I would look at, is if you notice that weather-related symptoms, then see whether piracetam shuts it down. I don't have anything like that to judge it with, but I know that it's relatively common. So it could easily affect
And
that.
I have a high pressure, they're telling me because of my weakness of the heart. Because EF was down to 1920. And I was back to 36. You know, but that's
Well,
what they were
do you
saying.
do any kind of exercise? Mild, moderate
I
exercise?
do extreme exercise.
Okay, then that's what I would do if I were you.
Yeah.
Would be look at the effect of the piracetam on exercise-induced heart rate and breathing.
Okay.
Because that would go to the question of your heart's reliance upon oxygen and whether piracetam is actually making that more efficient or not.
Okay, good idea.
Okay?
Yeah.
Did you hazard a guess between doses of piracetam, half-life,
What?
Oh, half-life. Oh. Well, the standard dosing is 3 times a day. Piracetam is excreted in the urine unchanged. It's not metabolized. It's highly water soluble. So my guess is that it's mainly just diffuses into the body and diffuses out again. So my guess is that within 24 hours, you're probably down to almost nothing. So I guess it would be similar to vitamin C on that kind of level.
So how does it work? Does it interfere with your hormone or what? How does it work?
Nobody knows really. It moderates glutamate receptors to some degree. So there's all kinds of different effects that have been observed with piracetam, but none of them really seem to explain its full spectrum of effects.
Does it work on dementia patients? Because
It can. It's used therapeutically for treating stroke-related injuries. So if you lose your ability to speak, taking piracetam can speed up your recovery from regaining verbal skills after a
I
stroke.
think that's somebody that might want to change the
Yeah.
direction of the conversation here.
Okay.
I'm like,
Let me change the subject to the second one, which is Alzheimer's disease reversal.
is that okay?
I don't care anything with drugs.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the first talk I ever gave on Alzheimer's reversal was here, way back in, I think it was 2003 or something like that, or 2004. No idea exactly when, it's too long ago. But that insight that I had into Alzheimer's disease was based on a bottom-up kind of observation of the scientific literature that would look at one of the earliest possible stages of Alzheimer's disease, which was inhibition of neural growth cones. And in this case, it was a marine snail neuron. It was so big that you can actually look at it under a microscope. And this is one of the things that's seen in Alzheimer's disease, is that the microtubules, which are these long structures that control growth cones, depolarize in Alzheimer's disease. And this result pointed to a very specific mechanism for it and why it was associated with mercury. They used mercury in the study, and they pointed out that mercury binds to the tubulin monomer It bonds to tau protein, phosphorylases. It bonds to the kinases that are involved in the phosphorylation cycle. So when you look at the enzymes that are adversely affected in Alzheimer's disease as a group, every single one of them has a sulfur atom in its active site. And that's why mercury is toxic to those enzymes. And when you look at other enzymes that don't have sulfur, none of them are inhibited, or if they are inhibited, it's collateral inhibition, because the sulfur enzyme inhibits this enzyme, it's down, but it's not a direct inhibition, it's an indirect inhibition. And so I came to this conclusion that the glutathione pool, which detoxifies mercury when it becomes compromised, leads to Alzheimer's disease. And that was basically a bottom-up kind of understanding of it. And in the last 5 years, Dale Bredesen has published a book on his research where he used a top-down approach to studying Alzheimer's disease, where he used genetics and epigenetics and proteomics to look at what's going on in these Alzheimer's patients and how they're all related to each other and different from each other as well, and basically came to exactly the same conclusion from a therapeutic point of view, but not a mechanistic point of view. So in other words, Dale's approach in looking down has come to the realization that mitochondrial nutrients are important therapies, and coconut oil is important therapy, and electrolytes, and hormones, and he's got all this list of things that deal with fundamental energy mechanisms that involve in glutathione maintenance. But he hasn't come to the realization of the sulfur atom at the center of all these enzymes. So I think this is a good illustration of the relative value of a kind of bottom-up approach to looking for patterns and a top-down approach, and the fact that in this situation, both approaches led to the same solution is a sign that this is the death knell for the end of Alzheimer's disease. That within 10 years, Alzheimer's disease will be routinely reversed throughout the world.
Glutathione plays an important role in that?
Yes, glutathione is the pivot point for the whole process.
How much-
Glutathione does two things. It's an antioxidant, and it's a mercury detoxicant.
How much is daily dose for a normal person?
Daily dose may or may not make any difference because it's not so much about the glutathione that your body has, it's about how efficiently it's recycled. So glutathione molecules might be used 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times before they're ultimately damaged. And so the difference is in somebody it may only get used 100 times, and somebody else it may be used 10,000 times. That's going to make a big difference in how the glutathione works.
So how do you know if one should use glutathione, when they should stop using it? How do you know that?
Well, my past opinion was that it didn't matter because glutathione synthesis was negative feedback inhibited, that if you take something with glutathione in it, or you take something that makes more glutathione, that your body will shut down your natural glutathione synthesis and compensate. So thyroid hormone. You take thyroid hormone, your body lowers its production. Testosterone. Take testosterone, your body lowers its testosterone production. That's a negative feedback loop. And so you're fighting with a supplement, you're fighting to raise something that the body is trying to stabilize.
So what's the best way to deal with it?
You increase your energy so that you recycle your glutathione efficiency. So your body produces energy as NADH and ATP. ATP drives your energy, it drives your enzymes, but the NADH is a reducing agent. It drives your antioxidant defense system. It supports your vitamin C and glutathione. So your energy system is determining how much glutathione is effective and how much of it isn't effective
So how do you
regarding
use your
mercury.
energy? Yeah. How do you?
Thyroid hormone, mitochondrial nutrition, exercise, breathing, negative ions, being grounded,
Niacinamide help that?
eating a low-carb diet. I mean, it just there's 1,000 ways that, well, I could probably only deal with maybe 100 tonight before my brain would fry.
Does niacinamide help the NADH?
Well,
Uh,
NADH is coenzymated niacin. It's vitamin B3, the activated coenzyme. So niacin is a direct precursor to NADH, but it's not about the NADH itself, but sometimes it can be. Parkinson patients, for example, respond. You give them NADH, they respond to it positively. Half of them do. I can take NADH in huge quantities and nothing happens to me. I've done this several times. I actually consumed an entire gram of NADH once, just to see if I could possibly have any kind of
Well,
benefit.
you probably have enough then.
That was $100 of NADH at the time, in one dose.
And you mentioned mitochondrial nutrients, what do you think what do you recommend there?
Well, the answer for you would be the ones that produce an increase in your body temperature, or an increase in your strength, an increase in your stamina, an increase in your mental performance, an increase in your sleep, an increase in your feelings of well-being. So if you take lipoic acid and nothing happens, that probably means that you have plenty of lipoic acid. But lipoic acid works with vitamin B1 and B2 and B3, so if your B1 is deficient, taking lipoic acid is not going to help. But if you take B1, it will help.
So increasing all those other factors is what helps
Well,
the
that's the
mitochondria.
kitchen sink approach. If you're desperate, then you just try all the mitochondrial nutrients at once and see if you get any kind of benefit. If the answer is no, you've eliminated, 8 different things in one fell swoop. So it's very efficient. But if you do get a benefit, now you're stuck. You don't know which of those is responsible. So you're wasting your money on a whole bunch of things when maybe only one is needed.
But you're going back to the basics of body temperature and
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah, so do you have an exercise program?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you do some kind of exercise on a regular basis, you have a sense of how much weight you can lift before you get to failure, or lactic acid pain. If you do a bicycle trip, you have an idea of how long it takes you to do a particular loop. If you do aerobics, can you do it for 25 minutes? Can you do it for 15 minutes? You have some kind of feedback about your exercise and whether or not that changes as a result of taking a supplement.
So that's the way to test these new
Well,
supplements.
that's one way. Strength, that would be weightlifting. Stamina, that would be aerobics. So, mental performance, that would be online through a game, or maybe you're playing duplicate bridge as a hobby now that you've retired.
Which one is the most reliable?
But what's the nutrient? What's the actual nutrient?
Whatever nutrient you take. You take niacin, does your exercise change? You're looking for your body to communicate with you. So your body speaks a different language than English.
Right, no, I know that, yeah.
Yeah, it gives you aches and pains when things are really bad, and it might give you a feeling of brain fog or weakness as a result of something not being right.
So you're just talking about lifestyle stuff and you just keep tweaking. So the mitochondrial nutrients is just you're tweaking your
That's
lifestyle
right.
until you feel better and better and
You
better.
adjust,
That's it.
you adjust each mechanism in turn.
In your lifestyle.
So if you have a car that's not working, you change the air filter. Nothing happens. You put fresh gas in it. Nothing happens. You put spark plugs in it. Boom! Your car is zooming. It had a bad spark plug. So, it's a trial and error process on a self-care basis to, in a sense, solve a problem that would be called in engineering circles a black box problem. You have a black box, you can't see anything that's going on inside of it, you just know your inputs and your outputs, and you try to figure out what's going on inside the box based on inputs and outputs. So that's fundamentally where we are for self-care. But we, being conscious beings, have all kinds of connections to our well-being. Subconscious, physiological, emotional, intellectual, all these kinds of things are operating, and whatever you can notice, that becomes your tool, becomes your analyte to pay attention to. And then usually I tell people, it's something that is a complaint, something that's not working right. If you have an injury and it's giving you pain, that pain is a signal. So on a scale of 1 to 5, is it light 1 or is it 5 heavy? You just track that over time and look to see what you're doing that makes it go up, makes it worse, or makes it get better. You look for what's changing.
Of the 3 things that you mentioned, you can test, where does the aerobic exercise stack up in testing new, treatments?
Aerobic exercise is a stamina issue. It goes to your VO2 max, how much oxygen can you absorb, how much energy can you generate before you get to lactic acid production, which would make you burn, your muscles burn, or might make you ache the following day.
What if
sore
you just
following
feel
it.
shortness of breath, slightly, nothing else?
That's another way to do it. If you have emphysema or a lung issue or congestive heart failure where there's some particular organ, you just track the efficiency of that organ. So if you look at heart rate recovery, for a heart condition, look at heart rate recovery. That would give you a good signal. If you've got shortness of breath, that could be somebody with COPD or asthma or...
No, eventually everybody's going to suffer if you keep pushing yourself, right?
Right, but what system is the most talkative? What part of your body is communicating in a way that our oblivious, thick-brained minds can see more easily? You know, there's all kinds of, you talk to people about their condition, and then you say, you know, they got this major complaint, and I said, well, if you go back 2 years ago, was it there? And they go, well, kind of, it was less and all, but it wasn't as much, and so they can trace it back in time. But the issue is that their body communication was quiet enough at some point that they just lived with it. It's just like the way things are. And our health condition changes so slowly that we just don't notice it. It's too subtle. And you have ups and downs. Your cognitive performance is going up and down all the time during the day. And from minute to minute or hour to hour, it's moving so much that day-to-day changes are like oblivious, you know, right over our heads. So the idea is, how do you become aware of this stuff? How do you learn to speak body? Your body's talking. How do you learn to speak that language so that you can get feedback and make good decisions on a relatively short time frame, so that you're now biohacking your health and your well-being? I bet you that you've been doing this for 20 years and you just haven't known that's what it's called.
No, I know it. I learned that in college science class. When you want to study something, you keep everything else constant, focus on one change at a time, and see what you're seeing.
That's
And
right.
that's what you're saying.
As long as you know what kind of time frame. So piracetam
What
would be a
daily?
time frame of 3 hours, and vitamin B3 would be a time frame of maybe 6 or 8 hours. But something like ligament strength, that might be 3 months.
Yeah, it's true.
So if you're looking for glutathione, what do you think of the capsule form that Dave Asprey has of liposomal?
It's really efficiently absorbed, but I don't recommend liposomal anything as a chronic therapy, as a regular dietary supplement. It's all made with omega-6 rich soy lecithin as a major component, so you're getting fat, you're getting diunsaturated fat, which is probably the least beneficial and the most damaging kind of fat that you can consume as a food substance. So it would be like, you know, taking corn oil supplements every day. Not a good idea. But for something that's short term, let's just say for the sake of argument that your best friend is getting married and you're the best man and you're going to Las Vegas and you're going to get drunk for 3 days in a row. And you're not just going to get drunk, you're going to get shit-faced drunk. So that's when you want that liposomal glutathione. So 3 days of lecithin is no big deal.
Who is this guy?
Is somebody else back here?
Oh,
This is good. This is good.
Yeah.
Okay, we got one more question. Last
Okay,
question.
one more, yeah.
Talking about dopamine.
Okay. I did a lot of what I call my designer brain series of articles in my newsletter, Sarah newsletter, I don't know, 15 years ago or 20 years ago or something like that. And that involved me experimenting with my neurotransmitters. So I took L-Dopa, which is a precursor for dopamine, and I took Deprinyl, which is a drug that modifies dopamine activity, and I took amphetamine, which does both dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine activity. And I experimented with tryptophan and serotonin precursors. So I mapped out in my own cognitive space and behavioral space a kind of dopamine serotonin axis and a GABA
Glutamine?
well, it wasn't glutamate, it was choline, a cholinergic system. I mapped it out in two-dimensional space based on my experience And I learned that I'm dopamine dominant and I'm cholinergically dominant. And this was a problem. We actually got into a problem with this because I was one of the people that introduced DMAE to the U.S. health food market back in the early 80s. And that's a very powerful cholinergic. And so when I was experimenting with it, I was getting cholinergically overdriven, and you could drive nails with these muscles right there. But they were that tight and all. And one of my coworkers did the same kind of thing, and somebody called his name, and he turned his head, and he pulled the muscle inside of his neck, and I wore a neck brace for 6 weeks. So, you know, this is good to know, but the main thing about dopamine is that it deals with a kind of level of life that means a lot to us. It's our reward center. We have our passion is connected to our dopamine, our drives, our competitiveness, our assertiveness. The zest of life is mediated by that dopamine system. And if you lose your dopamine tone, you become apathetic. And you lose interest in life, and you don't look forward to waking up in the morning, and you don't care about sex, and you don't care about your career, and you don't care about, you know, the well-being of leaving a legacy and things like that. And so I think dopamine is a very important neurotransmitter to deal with, especially in middle-aged and older people when dopamine is naturally declining. When you take somebody who's young in their 20s and you give them a dopamine agonist, they usually go nuts. They stop sleeping, they talk incessantly, they become obsessive and compulsive about something, they work for 3 days straight on a project and finish it in record time, but you wouldn't want to spend any time with them. But when you reach about 45 to 55 years of age and your dopaminergic tone is declining, it can be huge. And Deprenyl is one of my favorite smart drugs of choice for that particular reason. And I like Deprenyl better than the nutrients that would feed the dopamine system for 2 reasons. One is that dopamine itself is a pro-aging influence on some level, and that it causes a kind of neurological aging in particular parts of the brain. And it's too volatile. L-Dopa will cause your dopamine to go up in maybe 3 hours and then crash in maybe 9 hours. So it's a little bit too much like a roller coaster. The Deprenyl provides a very steady state smoothly over the course of the day and has anti-aging benefits. So does that answer your question?
Say again that name.
Deprenyl.
Thank you.
Deprennyl. And in the US it's called Selegiline. It's the only, as far as I know, the only country in the world that calls it Selegiline, calls it something different. But there's a chapter of it in the Smart Drugs 2 book.
In which book?
Smart Drugs 2.
Thank you.
Okay.
Question.
Thank you.
On our way out. All right, thank you everyone for coming. We'll be here in January again, the 3rd Thursday of every month.